I believe you just outpost moderned the deconstructionists there.
Yeah, no, I for real,
So
the
you can put a
deconstructionist
caption
needs
like
a healthy
watch
dose of
Matt
postmodernism.
watch Matt dunk on deconstructionists.
Welcome to Legalese, episode number six.
Hey,
Episode six.
look at us.
We're still cooking. We're still cooking. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Ready to chat about work comp. So,
Always.
Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of a framework because there's lots of different kinds of work comp cases. So maybe give us a lay of the land on a way to think about the different types of work comp cases there are.
Sure. So there's two broad categories. Well, three broad categories of types of awards that you can get under work comp. Generally, the medical benefits are always going to be the same, meaning the employer, if you're injured at work and there's a causal nexus to or an employment quality to the injury, um, then the employer has to pay for that medical. But for the award, that can vary somewhat. And the broad categories are a permanent total disability, a work disability, or a functional disability. And there's even another category of whole body disability that we'll talk about. But a work disability is when is a different category that you can move into, uh, and there's different thresholds. So one is if you have over a 7.5% impairment under the AMA guides, uh, but uh, a scheduled injury or a functional injury is a different calculation that we can talk about, and then we can do another discussion on work disability. But functional uh, or yeah, functional impairment is calculated by a statutory formula. And so you get injured at work, you go through treatment. At the end of the case, a physician will rate you under the American Medical Association guides using the sixth edition as a guide to infer or derive that rating. And they can the because of a case called uh, U.S. Foods v. Johnson. They don't have to strictly adhere to the sixth edition. They can just use it as a baseline. The case says. Um, so they use that to derive a percentage of impairment. Then the rest of the calculation under the statute is uh, the amount of weeks assigned to a type of injury under the statute. So there's a schedule of injuries. This is my this is an older version, but there's literally a number of weeks assigned here to various body parts, and
And
so
what
you can.
kinds of injuries are we talking about here?
So virtually any kind. So if you have a shoulder injury, that's there's 225 weeks assigned to a shoulder. An arm is 210, forearm 200, hand 150, leg 200, lower leg 190. They have it broken down an eyeball. If you lose one eyeball, then that's worth 120. Now, if your body part that is injured is not found on this schedule, then they use 415 weeks, and that's called a whole body disability or impairment.
What situations would you be using the scheduled injury, and what situations would you instead be using like a whole body situation?
It's purely dependent upon what part of your body is injured. So if you get a finger that's injured, you go to the schedule under the statute, see if that's listed, and then you use that number of weeks within the statutory formula. And so if it's a whole body, which would, most typically you'd think of a back as a whole body uh, injury, but or interestingly enough, If you have both arms or both legs, that will kick you into a whole body impairment.
Okay.
So,
So let's imagine a scenario where I have injured my shoulder and I make about 25 bucks an hour. Um, what kind of award might I expect at the end of this process?
yeah. Um, so, so you said shoulder.
Hmm.
So you look at the schedule, you have 225 weeks. And so often a common shoulder injury that we see is rotator cuff tear. And if you have a rotator cuff tear, you're likely going to have surgery. You're going to be off for a number of weeks. Let's say you're off for 4 weeks. And so you get temporary total disability for that number of weeks. Then that is minused from the 225 in the final calculation because you've already been paid that benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So then let's say you get a 15% impairment rating, which is not terribly uncommon. Um, and you said you make $25 an hour.
Hmm.
Let's say um, you work 40 hours a week. So 25 times 40 equals $1,000. You multiply that by 2/3 of your average weekly wage times two divided by three is 666 and 67 cents, right? So that becomes the compensation rate for your case. And I know this is very interesting. Uh,
It's a little confusing. We'll put some descriptions, some of these details in the
yeah,
notes, so people can get a visual.
but
And we also have a PDF resource that can help break this down that we'll put in the notes as well that can help people keep track of what we're talking about. But keep going. So you've got that compensation rate.
yeah, and that is one in three parts of the statutory formula. And so you get the compensation rate, which is subject to a cap, by the way. So the Department of Labor releases what the cap is. I don't even know what it is right now. I think it may be up to 900 something. Any wage above 900 is subject to that cap. Um, so so you derive the compensation rate usually through a wage statement, but you can estimate it by saying, I work 40 hours, I get paid this now. So we've got 666. Then you take
It's an
the,
unfortunate number.
yeah, it's very good. You picked the starting number
I did. I
at
didn't mean to end up here.
25. um, I do this enough. I thought about it. I was like, well, it is what it is. Um, we're not superstitious here.
No, not at all.
We're still, my friend Mike Kege's joke. I'm just a little stitious, but the so you take the compensation rate, you multiply that by the percentage of impairment and the number of weeks assigned to the statute. And we already said the number of weeks was 221. So you multiply that out. And now we have a much more kosher number of 147,333. And then you times that by the percentage of impairment, which we said was hypothetically 15%. And that's 22,000. So essentially, if that was the only evidence in the case, then an administrative law judge would award 200 or 22,000 and some change. And then they'd put in the award. Also, there was TTD that was paid, and that's a part of the award as well. TTD meaning a temporary payment for while you're off work during treatment. So temporary, totally disabled.
How does somebody get an impairment rating?
There's so uh, the treating doctor often will do that. So the work comp statute says that they get to pick your doctor. That's called an authorized treating doctor. And they is the insurance company for your employer. And so they'll pick a treater, and they have a list of people that they know that do this. And generally speaking, they'll pick treaters that give more conservative impairment ratings, and so the, that physician will offer their opinion as to what your percentage of impairment is. Often, it's the surgeon that did the surgery. So sometimes we joke. Um, this surgeon was very proud of their work, and there's no impairment, and it's shocking. Um, and that's not most surgeons for sure. Uh, but generally speaking, the insurance companies like to pick doctors that will give conservative ratings or lower ratings. And so if you hire an attorney like me, we have a number of experts that we use, but we'll send you to a surgeon that will uh, traditionally, and I do have exceptions to this, a few in the 14 years, not many, but we'll send you to our expert who will give his opinion, which tends to be higher, and uh, and then often, but not always, the administrative law judge will average those opinions. Historically, they've done that. Um, we're at a state in the law where we're wondering if that will happen more or less right now. And frankly, you just want an attorney that kind of knows what is persuasive to the administrative law judges at the time. So oftentimes that will get average. So, for 15%, if you've got, uh, say, my expert gives it 20, their expert gives it 10, then that'd be a situation where you get a 15. And often you can negotiate a settlement for that because we all kind of know, uh, and we being workers' compensation lawyers often know the ranges and where this is going to land in terms, especially after we get uh, the doctors. Um, a recent change in the law has been often. It was frustrating for some of my clients because one of the ways the ALJ solved this battle of the experts is they would just order a court ordered independent medical examination to a doctor that the parties agreed on. And there's kind of a list of usual suspects that we all kind of agreed they were a middle of the road doctor in terms of how they rated. And then we'd get that rating, and then the judge would go with that. And that has largely been eliminated from the latest version of the law beginning in 2024. And I think that will be more efficient overall. I mean, I had clients that were waiting for a long period of time on these court ordered IME docs, and that wasn't what was best for claimants,
So
injured
we're going
workers,
back. So after this recent law change, we're going back to their doctor's opinion, and
versus ours. Yeah, and we just have to argue it.
that makes sense. Okay. Well, scheduled injuries.
That is a scheduled injury.
Look in the description, the show notes, and we'll have a few more resources down there to unpack that a little more for you.
And we'll do a
Okay.
break for a commercial for our patent water bottles,
Oh
which you can
yeah,
get just by coming by the office, and we'll give you one.
we'll just give you one. Yeah, come say hi. We'll give you a water bottle. Um, okay, let's move to the next portion of our conversation. Um, Mike, what is catching your interest these days?
Well, I'm glad you asked because we didn't talk about this ahead of time. Um,
We did.
I'm just kidding. We
We
did.
did. We talked about it.
Uh, and what we were thinking about talking about is something that's been on my mind as um, a Christian. There's I don't know if you want to call it a fad or a trend for people deconstructing their faith, which really has its roots in kind of, I'd say, postmodern philosophy um, in terms of what the term deconstruction means.
And it's
Um,
generally men in their 30s.
yeah, exactly. And so what that means is uh, someone is questioning their faith and saying, "I'm going to deconstruct," or "I am in the process of deconstructing," and that just means they're questioning their fundamental beliefs around their faith. And I'm sure you've known some people who have done that, and I have as well. And it's just interesting that this is a trend going on, particularly within the evangelical Christian community, which is what I was brought up in and still am a part of. Um, so so that's what I was thinking about. And you said you had some insights into that. And so I'll ask you a question. What do you think is causing this trend, particularly among 30-year-old men, but not exclusive to that category?
Yeah. Um, Gosh, I think there's a lot of things that are leading to that trend. Um, in some of the examples I've seen, kind of the public examples of public figures, there's sort of a reference to, usually, there's often a reference to like evolution, as maybe a beginning point of that process. And yeah, and one example in particular that comes to mind, um, was kind of a statement made that uh, they started to feel like the things that they had been taught weren't reliable. And that sort of started this domino effect, where the authorities that they had looked to previously, they stopped viewing as credible. Um, and so then eventually that led all the way down for this particular person to things like the resurrection, uh, the historical case for the resurrection. So that, I think in some instances it makes me feel like the importance of giving credible responses, to questions, and not questions, not answers that you don't find credible yourself. Um, the things, and really intellectually honest responses to people's questions, rather than just reflexive ones and defensive ones. Um, because the quality of the response that we give people and the quality of the answers, so to speak, to questions, uh, really has a big impact on people's spiritual journey down the road.
Yeah, and that can, if you're putting up straw men intentionally or unintentionally, if those straw men get knocked down, then for someone who naturally believed what these authority figures were telling them, then that becomes shocking and a scandal to that person because it's like, well, this I've been deceived or duped in some way. And I think it would be easy to then like step on some toes and name names like, well, I think this source is ridiculous or this source is ridiculous. And there's certainly some out there that I think are a little silly. But I think maybe another approach to that rather than just calling out um, things, uh, I think it's also important to present these things with an element of humility too. Um, I had a great professor at Oklahoma Christian, um, Fearhelm, Dr. Fearhelm. I have no idea if he's still alive, but he was a rocket scientist, NASA scientist, and uh, he had all extensive training, and then he had come back to Oklahoma to teach gen ed astronomy courses because he just loved it. And so naturally within that realm, there's all the language that you use when you're talking about astronomy is, billions of years and all of that. And he was like, look, I'm just going to teach this. Um, and he taught it with humility. He's like, I understand that there are biblical scholars that say that have a young earth theory and he's saying, I don't know all of the answers to all of that, but I'm saying, here's what science is indicating, and here's why. And, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But this is why I think that's credible. And he approached an ancient universe, like he had an ancient universe worldview, billions, if not trillions of years. And that was really helpful to me, just his attitude of humility, like he's not slamming this. Maybe that was some self preservation on his part being at a Christian university, but it was really helpful to me. And I think you could have that approach uh, on the other side of that, uh, and I think that would be helpful too, because then you're not scandalizing someone who's then saying, you presented this as pun intended gospel truth. Um, and it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You use the word gospel truth. I think that's a helpful distinction, um, to think about things as how central are they to the faith and how peripheral are certain ideas to the faith. Um, but that idea of humility is so key. And I think that idea of humility should be in all of our, like, it should not just be for Christians, that concept of intellectual humility. It should be for all of us because things are really hard to know. They're
right,
really hard to know. Um, I this the example again I was thinking of, it's basically said that anyone who doesn't think that evolution explains everything, the existence of the diversity of life as we find it, is intellectually dishonest, or um, you know, just as has a bias that blinds them to anything. And I think there's actually pretty intellectual heavyweights in sort of the more creation side of the conversation, and not like Michael Behe, um, Stephen Meyer. Like, these are not lightweights in the field by any means. They have really strong academic credentials, and I think make ask really important questions. I don't know if they're right in the field, um, but almost in any field of study that you go into, you can find really people of like really high academic credentials, really smart people who raise interesting questions about things that we think are that we feel pretty confident about. And that's not to say you can't know anything, but I just think in most areas we should have a little bit of humility to recognize there's some really smart people who probably disagree with me on this, and that should leave me with an openness, an open mind as I have discussions on different topics. So,
yeah, and then I can already hear the criticism in the back of my head from the people that taught us. We both grew up in evangelical homes, and churches that they spent time trying to trying to um, poke holes in evolutionary theory or all of these, and knowing was important to them. It and I can imagine their criticism. And what would you think that criticism would be? Like, you're the expert. By the way, he's the expert, and you can use the word expert because he's a seminary student getting a degree in what are you getting your degree in?
Masters of Divinity.
Masters of Divinity.
Yeah.
So,
Um, how would I respond to somebody say, no, you really do need to have certainty on this idea, like evolution is false, for example.
right.
Um, well, again, like you mentioned, what sorts of doctrines are peripheral to the faith and which ones are central. And I think it starts to get a little complicated, particularly in Christian doctrine on this subject, because there are things like God created the universe. That's a central Christian doctrine. Um, and then you can work your way down to things like young earth, which I think is on this spectrum of creation beliefs, is probably on the less central, of Christian doctrines around creation. So it's kind of hard to talk about. But I think certainty is the wrong word. I don't think certainty is ever required for knowledge. Um, Certainty is a personal attitude, and a feeling of confidence that we have. Um, you can know lots of things without certainty. So I just think expecting us to have certainty in order to believe something or to know something, I think, is the wrong expectation of knowledge, period. And that's not a theological statement. That's just kind of a philosophical statement. Um, One other thing I kind of wanted to mention before we wrap up um, is a lot of the pressure that I think comes in this space. I think there's a big draw toward modernist ways of thinking. We can know everything. We can map the universe out. Uh, I think there's a real problem in approaching the world that way. C.S. Lewis wrote a critique of modernism. He wrote called "The Abolition of Man," and there's a quote at the end of that book that is one of my favorite things anybody has ever said. To see through everything is the same as seeing nothing. Um, and I think that there's something really true about that for the experience of people who are deconstructing, is because you can kind of have this modernist approach. I need certainty for all of the things that I know, and I can know these things through scientific inquiry or empiricism. And you end up seeing through, so to speak, all of these beliefs that you have to the point where you actually end up with a less coherent worldview than what you had previously, because you've seen through all of these different things. And I think really the goal that we should have when we approach these big questions is, what is the worldview? What is the what is the worldview that makes sense, the most sense of the world as we experience it and as we find it, where we came from, why we're here, um, why do we have this moral intuition? What is the world that really, what is the worldview that makes the most sense of the world as we find it and as we experience it? And if we approach the world sort of seeing through everything, we might end up in a place where we actually, with a worldview that has less explanatory power, um, which might be a problem. So,
I believe you just outpost moderned the deconstructionists there.
yeah, no, I for real,
So
the
you can put a
deconstructionist
caption
needs
like
a healthy dose of postmodernism.
watch Matt dunk on deconstructionists, which would not be humble.
Yeah, I would not be humble, but yeah, I don't like modernism as an approach to knowledge. I think it's
Deeply
got
flawed.
some
Yeah.
drawbacks. So
Yeah. Um, which is, yeah, it has its drawbacks. And to build on what you were saying, uh, there's there's two people that have influenced my thinking on this. Um, One, good old Francis Schaeffer, and then Jordan Peterson, which is such a cliche. I have so much shame about this, but I love him. And so Francis Schaeffer said, um, in answer to this epistemological question of what can we know, well, the Bible is actually a pretty good place to start because you see in the Bible things that explain things that are going on in your own heart and mind. And that's ostensibly an external, or even as Jordan Peterson would point out, an ancient source. And it readily explains uh, your own heart and what's going on in the world. And so Jordan Peterson says, it's like, well, is it true? He's like, it's the most true thing in a meta sense. It has these things that are mysterious, difficult, and painful. And it speaks to those things. And so because we have a Bible that talks to about real pain, real suffering, and has that within it, I think you can trust it as reliable. So
hmm yeah,
that's
and people who are
I,
going through deconstruction, as I mentioned, they are noticing the tendency of people to be self-deceptive, but that's what the Bible says about us. The The Bible says we are prone to self-deception, and all the more reason, as it says in the Psalms, to lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Um, so, yeah.
There's a call within that to humility,
Hmm.
which,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'll give you the last word to end it.
Well, I think I'm
That's
good with
it.
that one. I'm
That's
good with
good.
that one. Well, thanks for hanging out with us
Yeah.
and learning about work comp and delving into epistemology.
These are
Goodness,
two vastly different subjects.
we're all over the place.
We are all over the place.
Yeah.
First, we're all business, and then we pontificate about things that
I think
I'm
that's,
certainly not qualified to talk about.
yep.
But
Yep. I
but
think that's
Matt's the
our MO.
expert.
All right. Well, come see us next week as we pontificate some more.